with the first pick.
Took some really big thinkers in town to say, hey, there's nothing that we can't do here.
KC Sports Network presents the stories behind how the NFL Draft came to Kansas City.
It opened a door unlike anything we've had.
Join Marlia Campbell on the new storytelling channel at KCSN.
How do we sell and share what Kansas City is all about? Yeah, I'm going to work like hell to make sure we share the best, but it means that we have to be near flawless.
We deserve this. We deserve this. And we are going to host one hell of a party.
Hear from a few of those who made it happen, like Kathy Nelson, Quentin Lucas, and Greg Graves. And now, here's Marlia Campbell.
As we told you in part one, a small committee had begun the process of creating a bid to bring the NFL Draft to Kansas City. At this point, the draft had only been held in 3 cities before: New York for half a century, Chicago in 2015 and 2016, and Philadelphia in 2017. In November of 2017, a small, highly curated group of Kansas City leaders had 1 hour to convince the NFL we deserved to host. Chiefs President Mark Donovan, then City Manager Troy Schulte, and Kansas City Sports Commission President and CEO Kathy Nelson worked tirelessly to make their case. They rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed some more.
Really just our staff. We sat in our conference room and had other people. We'd go through the slide and Mark would say, okay, I will introduce this slide and I'll talk about this. So we knew exactly, really just like a play. We knew whose speaking role happened at what time. We also then had our staff kind of send questions our way, or they'd sit there and ask us questions live. What about this? What about that? And just needing to prepare and rehearse what our responses would be.
The group would have 40 minutes to make their pitch to an NFL committee in New York, followed by 20 minutes of questions.
That was a typical, it was kind of similar to what we do for Big 12, NCAA, Olympic style of events, where we went in and had to do a little bit about why Kansas City, what we offer, what we would do for the event, and who's involved. We had put together a little 2-minute sizzle reel on Kansas City, but it was truly the draft. Sizzle reel, we wouldn't have shown just a generic Kansas City sizzle reel. We were coming off the success of Big 12 and other things. We were able to pull some great footage. Of course, the parade footage was very helpful. But that was our presentation. I'm all about rehearsing. We rehearse the parade in advance. Like, we rehearse because anything could happen. So we rehearsed. Mark and Troy and I rehearsed many times before we got on that 5 a.m. flight to New York.
Bright and early, Wednesday morning, November 17th of 2017, Nelson, Schulte, and Donovan hop on their flight, well rehearsed and ready to advocate for Kansas City as a host site.
The plane had lost heat. So on the way to New York, it was miserably cold on the flight to New York. And it was so crazy. Troy was like back there just huddled up. And I thought, at least we're awake and sharp right now. But my feet, it was miserable getting to New York. It was a direct flight, but the plane didn't have heat that morning for some odd reason. There's always nerves. I mean, my dad would say, if you're nervous, that means you care. So absolutely, there were nerves. I believe Mark and Troy were probably a little nervous too, because it was an unexpected situation. We arrived in New York and jumped into a car and got over to the NFL headquarters, and traffic was bad, and I think that made us all a little more anxious as well, like we can't be late. And we weren't.
Whatever image you have in your head of a penthouse conference room, floor-length windows letting in sunlight, a beautiful view of the New York City skyline, get rid of it. This was not that.
No, there were no windows. The NFL doesn't have the entire building, but they have quite a few floors in that building. And downstairs, they have a lot of their breakout conference rooms. So we went down, and it was still beautiful. They had all the helmets on a wall. I mean, I saved my pictures from that day. And we went down, and we were just in this weird hallway with no windows. You couldn't tell what the weather was like outside. And they walked us down the hall and into a room. And it was significant size room, but there were probably 30 people in there. There were 27 people from the NFL that were ready to listen to us.
There were a few other people there too, though. The competition. After all, Kansas City wasn't the only city wanting to host an event that draws hundreds of thousands of visitors, hauls in millions in economic lift, and provides priceless exposure.
And I saw some of my counterparts from other cities. I saw Seattle and Houston. There's somebody else maybe. Anyhow, I thought, oh, great. Now we're competing against them. So that was difficult to see and hear, but we're all friends, so it's friendly competition. But at the same time, I knew I had my work cut out for me. And I think the NFL at that time wasn't quite sure if they were awarding 1 year, 2 years, the next 4 years. This was still so new to them. So I figured we had a pretty good shot. And now I know that Houston, especially Janice, is like, when I saw you, that you were right before me, she thought, oh, great, it's hard to follow Kansas City. And that made me feel a lot better after the fact. I think we all have started to figure out how to attract these types of events. And Kansas City has a special heart to it. And there's Chiefs Kingdom. You don't hear that much about the Texans. There's not right? And so I think she thought, oh my gosh, the history of the Chiefs, the passion of the Chiefs, the passion of our city, that she knew she had her work cut out just like I did.
In this dark, windowless room, 27 NFL employees watched as the trio from Kansas City made their case. It didn't go perfectly, but when does anything work out exactly as you expect it to?
So it was funny. We had a couple different, 2 different presentations. They were all the same details. We just had a couple different pictures in them. And one was going to be funny in that we had a slide put up about welcoming NFL fans, and it was a picture of a Green Bay football player jumping into the stands. And I said, I want you to know we're here to welcome all fans. But then we had the exact same slide with the Chiefs player jumping the exact same way. And for some reason, we ended up, the wrong presentation played. So I had the Green Bay player, but I didn't have the Chiefs slide behind it. I'm like, uh-oh. So we just kept rolling. And, it was pretty smooth. The video played great. You could see their smiles. They, of course, all adored Mark. And Troy, we introduced Troy. And I think for me, the biggest takeaway, the room was set up in a U-shaped table, and I didn't know any of them, had never met any of the NFL event staff. And there were executives and middle management, and everyone that had a hands-on the draft was sitting there. And I kicked us off, and I said, how many of you have been to Kansas City? And I assumed everybody's hand would go up, and 3 people raised their hand. And I remember a little panic setting in. And I was really surprised that only 3 people, but they're the NFL events. They don't belong to a club. They don't go to games. They're there to produce a Super Bowl, a Pro Bowl, and the draft. And that's when I knew, well, now we really have to sell Kansas City. Our approach was different in that we knew we had to sell Kansas City. The presentation was what it was at that point. We needed to get them here. And that was obvious coming out of that meeting.
After answering a few questions and giving their courtesies, Kansas City's trio says goodbye.
Pretty typical in a sports type of bid setting. Thanks so much. They ask a few questions. I don't even remember what the questions were. And then it came back to, we'll be in touch. We'll continue communicating. We'll let you know what other questions we might have. And then we jumped back on a plane and flew back to Kansas City. We hadn't told anyone that we were going. Our staffs knew, but nobody else knew. And we land back in Kansas City, and there were cameras outside of the wall, a KCI setup. And I looked at Troy. I'm like, that's weird. I wonder what's happening. And Troy goes, well, when we got on the plane at 5 a.m. this morning, I tweeted, off to New York. I'm like, oh, no. So, of course, we're exhausted. And Troy goes, you better take these interviews. I'm like, no, this is your problem you had made. You take the interviews. The next thing I know, Mark has disappeared. I'm in the hall with Troy, and Troy's so tall, and I just looked up at him like, this is your problem. So that was kind of a funny way to end the day. And he said, yeah, I guess I didn't really think through about tweeting at 5 a.m. that we were on a flight.
This was that tweet from Schulte's Twitter account at that time, @KCMoManager, 5:16 a.m., November 15th, 2017. Quote, early morning flight with @KCI Airport and @SportKC, which is the sports commission. and at Chiefs to sell at NFL on hosting 2019 or 2020 hashtag NFL Draft in hashtag Kansas City, !
There were maybe 2 or 3 cameras there, and I said, I thought we all decided not to share this because I wasn't thinking this morning at 5 a.m. So I may have done one, but he took most of them. But yeah, we just went up to tell them our interest and share that what our city could provide. I think most knew that maybe we were considering it. You know, we weren't shy about, I mean, you can't be shy. You got to push your way into those types of conversations and situations. Nobody knew that day was our pitch.
Today we wanted to announce that we're going to take the NFL Draft in 2020 to Las Vegas. In addition, we also awarded the 2019 Draft to Nashville.
They picked Vegas. Now, nobody was surprised they were going to pick Las Vegas. First of all, I love Las Vegas. It's a great place to go for about 2 days and maybe 3 nights, which is exactly how long the NFL Draft is, right? A couple nights, 3 days, and then you leave, right, before it becomes part of you. And nobody was surprised. It was a brand new NFL city, of course.
With a lot of these events, even with NCAA, although the NCAA has gotten very savvy about how they release these, with the NCAA, you bid on a 4-year cycle, and then they'll announce it live immediately with all the championships and which cities, and then they call you. If you had been bidding on it, they call you immediately after the announcement and say, well, here's why you didn't get this. This is what you need to do next time. And the NFL was getting to be that way as well, of this, you know, this is exactly why we selected these cities. Here's what's happening. Here's what needs to happen next. So we're kind of in the know. We did know in advance of the December announcement that it wasn't going to be us. Not too far in advance. So there are a lot of conversations happening behind the scenes that the public doesn't know about, doesn't need to know about, right? So yes, we found out that we were not awarded that next grouping of those years, and it's kind of a blur, quite honestly. Then what's next for us? And I'm that type of person that no isn't no, it's not yet. So then what do we need to do to fix this? And that's when we really jumped in.
Let's formally introduce Greg Graves here. He's the former Burns & McDonnell CEO of 13 years. The Kansas City-based architecture and engineering company blossomed during his tenure.
Sly James has asked me for big and small favors over time, and me in reverse, and he'll usually do it over a text or a scotch after work at Westport, which was our favorite place, and never stopped dreaming about what Kansas City can be.
This is about the time then Kansas City Mayor Sly James asked him a favor.
I remember the day that Sly James asked me if I would co-chair the proposal to bring the NFL Draft to Kansas City. And he's always looking for someone to do a lot of work for free. And I'm always one that's willing to do a lot of work for free, especially if it helps Kansas City. And we started lining up the dates. Mark Donovan was involved, Clark Hunt, of course, and then all things around sports in Kansas City revolve around Kathy. That's just the way it goes. She is Kansas City's sports town when it comes to us hosting anything from a middle school wrestling tournament to as big as someday a Super Bowl, or even bigger, a World Cup. And I immediately said yes. And all we really did was started counting down what are the years that the draft has already picked, who are our biggest competition, and how do we convince the NFL that we can accomplish anything.
Coming up in our next episode,
It was full on, we need to prove now why they need to be here.
the group regroups after an initial rejection. How Nelson and company pick up the pieces and go for attempt number 2, this time on their own turf.